So I've been seeing some people still to this day not understanding what Game Pass is or how it works or how it makes money or just generally thinking that it's a terrible service. And I just wanted to take the time to sit down and very clearly explain all of that so that whenever any of you find somebody who either doesn't understand or doesn't want to understand, you can link them this video and they can leave all their mean comments here and be my problem instead of yours. So let's start by looking at what is undoubtedly the most important metric to any businessman who would be looking at whether or not Game Pass is worth having, which is just how much money does it make? This has been a talking point for a long time. There's a lot of people who say that they're throwing money away on it, that it's a loss leader. And after running some pretty simple calculations, I can say with extreme confidence that not only does Game Pass make money, but it in fact prints money to a ludicrous degree. So the last thing we heard in terms of subscriber numbers for Game Pass, because they don't really talk about it as often as I would like, they said that they had 25 million subscribers. That was back in January of 2022. It's safe to assume that by now, in September of 2023, that they're probably at about 30 million, if not more. And if you think that I'm stretching to get to that point, then you should know that in November of last year, PlayStation claimed that Game Pass had 29 million subscribers. So we were already most of the way there, apparently, nearly an entire year ago. And on top of that, I do think that the 30 million number is probably lowballing it, just because since that 25 million number, we would have seen the completion of the Bethesda acquisition, the announcement of the Activision Blizzard King announcement, and also just this year has been really good for Game Pass. I mean, we've been seeing things like Hi-Fi Rush go in and do great numbers, Lies of P is going to go in soon, Sea of Stars has been doing great, and of course, Starfield, which apparently has made so much money in its early access period alone that it's already exceeded Xbox's expectations in terms of profit. So really, I would say that Game Pass is looking more attractive right now than it ever has in the past. So all that to say, 30 million subscribers, that's the number that I'm going to be going on for all of my calculations in this video. Hopefully you agree with me. If not, too bad. We also know that apparently, and honestly surprisingly, between 70 and 80% of all Game Pass subscribers are subscribed at the highest tier of Game Pass Ultimate, for $16.99 a month. So let's split the difference on that, and we'll call it 75%, right? And we'll say 75% of 30 million subscribers is 22.5 million subscribers. 22.5 million times 16.99 or $16.99, the monthly subscription rate for Ultimate, gets us about $382.3 million a month. It also leaves us with 7.5 million subscribers unaccounted for. So let's be generous and assume that they're at the lowest possible price point, which would be $9.99. We take 7.5 million subscribers, multiply it by $9.99, and we get an additional roughly $76 million. 76 plus the 382.3 million from the Ultimate subscribers, and we're looking at a monthly income from Game Pass of $458.3 million per month. So that's kind of a crazy number, right? It's a little hard to visualize. So let's put that into perspective, right? That means that every single time that you go to pay your rent or your mortgage or whatever bills you have, Xbox makes nearly $500 million off of Game Pass alone. That doesn't include whatever money they would make off of microtransactions or DLC or regular game sales or the artist formerly known as Xbox Live Gold that's about to be rolled into Game Pass, and I'm sure I'll get a million comments about where they're like, oh, you didn't account for Xbox Live Gold, because at the time I was doing the math, it wasn't part of Game Pass, but whatever. Let's take those numbers, right, and let's compare it to what we can expect Sony to make in a year from PlayStation, right? Because that's what everyone wants to do, is find out which of these two strategies is more profitable, which one works better. We know, thanks to some lazy redaction during the ABK preliminary injunction hearing thing that Xbox had with the FTC, that Last of Us 2 and Horizon Forbidden West cost about $200 million to make. These are two of the biggest games that PlayStation has made, so we can assume that that's kind of the high end of their budget for their first-party titles. That means that Game Pass, in 1 month, would recoup the entire production value of both Last of Us 2 and Horizon Forbidden West with about $50 million to spare. And I should point out that $200 million that it would be spent on the production of either one of those games would have been spent over the entire time that game was being produced, so 5 to 7 years, whereas Xbox Game Pass makes that in a single month. Now, on PlayStation's best year, they put out maybe 3 actual first-party titles. They like to sort of play fast and loose with what is a first-party title. Like, they keep trying to tell people that Helldivers 2 is going to be a first-party title, even though it's very clearly a second-party because it's being made by a studio that they don't own. But they put out, in their best year, maybe 3 first-party games. So let's use that for our calculations. Analysts have said that Last of Us 2 made a profit of $300 million, and we'll just assume that that's true. If we add $200 million from the production of it, and another $100 million for the advertisement, since most games spend between 25 and 50% of their production cost in advertisement, and we'll take the high end of that because just in case, just to be as fair as possible, we add all that up, and we get $600 million, right? So if they put out 3 games that are all the quality of a Last of Us 2 in a single year, then we can take that $600 million, multiply it by 3, and we would get $1,800 million, or $1.8 billion, just depending on how you want to look at it. Meanwhile, over on the Xbox side, if we take the $458.3 million that they make in a month from Game Pass, multiply that by 12, we get $5,499.6 million, or roughly $5.5 billion. Even before rounding, if we take the 5,499.6 and we compare that to the amount of money that PlayStation would make off of 3 Last of Us's in a year, that still means that Game Pass would make more than 3 times what PlayStation first party would make on their best year ever. And that's with 30 million subscribers to Game Pass as compared to the entire player base of PlayStation, right? The 120 million owners of a PS4 and however many million owners of a PlayStation 5. So Game Pass makes 3 times the money that PlayStation's first party does with 1/4 of the user base. Now, I know that there's some parts of this math that probably people are going to disagree with. The thing that I think most people are going to stick to is the 70 to 80% of people being subscribed to Game Pass Ultimate, because that number seems ludicrous even to me, right? So let's ignore that, right? Let's say that all 30 million subscribers to Game Pass are at the absolute lowest tier, just to get a baseline of what the minimum would be here. At that price point, that's $299.7 million a month, which would be $3,596.4 million a year, which is still 2 times what Sony would make in their absolute best year. That means that if you're a company and your goal is making money, which it is, because you're a company, then it is irrefutable that Game Pass is by far the better option, right? Now, I still want PlayStation to do the things that they're doing. Don't get it twisted, right? I don't want PlayStation to completely change everything that they do. I really like the games that they make, right? You know, notwithstanding this weird, like, gas game live service kick that they're getting on right now that I honestly hope that they drop, because I don't think it's going to work out in their favor. I want them to continue doing the things that they're doing. This is not me saying that PlayStation should completely throw the book away and do what Xbox is doing, because like clearly what PlayStation is doing is working for them. But it is undeniable that Game Pass is significantly more successful monetarily than their strategy. And that's despite the fact that Xbox is in third place, and up until very recently, everyone thought that Game Pass had no games. And even despite that, this is the scenario that we find ourselves in. So I want to address some of the bad faith or just wrong arguments that I've heard online sort of against Game Pass. And the first is, does Game Pass cannibalize first-party game sales? And the answer is yes. However, as I've just shown you, it makes significantly more money. So while the number of units sold will go down because people are playing it through Game Pass instead of buying it a la carte, the amount of profit goes way up. So it does cannibalize units sold, but not profits. And that's what's actually important here. The second one I have is that it teaches people to not buy things. This is objectively not true. We know from metrics that have been released by Xbox and Microsoft that subscribers to Game Pass spend 150% as much money in the Xbox ecosystem on add-ons and microtransactions and even full game sales than those who are not subscribed to Game Pass. So no, it doesn't teach people to not purchase things. Actually, it seems to somehow incentivize them to spend more. So one of the newer and I think most incorrect arguments that I keep hearing against Game Pass is that developers hate it. Which, first of all, let me just start by saying flat out, no they don't. We've heard people like Sega come out and just say how much they love it and how great it's been for their profitability. We know that indie devs across the board love it. We know that games that go into Game Pass get an 830% average raise in player count, which means any multiplayer or games as a service game developer would love it. I think that this argument comes from people who think that a game like Grand Theft Auto 6 would lose money by being launched day one into Game Pass, which first of all, it wouldn't, because Xbox would have to pay whatever huge amount of money they would have lost through individual game sales for having put it into Game Pass. So they would have been covered regardless. But also, I don't think Xbox would pay to put something like Grand Theft Auto 6 into Game Pass day one, because that's not what Game Pass is for. I think that there's people who have this fundamental, whether intentional or not, misunderstanding of what the goal of Game Pass is. They do put their first-party titles, Xbox puts their first-party titles into Game Pass to cause people to subscribe, to encourage people to subscribe to Game Pass, because as I've just proven, those subscriptions make Xbox significantly more money than they would make by selling these games individually. But Game Pass also brings people into the Xbox ecosystem. So when a huge third-party AAA game like a Grand Theft Auto launches and is not in Game Pass, you'll be more likely to buy that game on Xbox, because that's just where you play most of your games now. So Game Pass isn't likely to ever be a place where tons of huge third-party games are launching day one, because it doesn't make sense for it to be that. Game Pass is primarily for, obviously, their first-party titles, but also smaller games that you maybe wouldn't have played otherwise, things like Lies of P or Wolong or Atomic Heart, or games that you missed the first time around that are maybe a little bit older, that can sort of get new life by being put back into Game Pass, and you go, oh, that's right, I wanted to play that and I never got around to it. That's what Game Pass is for, which means that it's exactly the same scenario as a Netflix or a Disney Plus or a HBO Max. None of those streaming services are a replacement for going to see movies. It's where you watch those services' first-party content and things that you missed in theaters. So for me personally, I still went to go see Across the Spider-Verse in theaters because I really wanted to see it and I wanted to see it on a big screen. But I didn't have time to go and see the Dungeons and Dragons movie, and I missed out, but I really wanted to see it. So when it came back around onto Paramount Plus, rather, I watched it there and had a great time, and I love that movie, right? This is what these subscription services exist to do. They're supplemental, not replacement. Okay? But devs love it because it allows them to do a number of things. Talking specifically about Game Pass now. So for big games, it allows them to boost their numbers back up once sales start to dwindle. They're able to put old games into the service to promote a sequel. We saw Bethesda do this a bunch before they were acquired. For a multiplayer or games as a service game, it helps them boost their player base. It gives big games a longer shelf life. So if a game starts to die off and they want to get people talking about it again, they can slip it back in there. It allows them to make more money off of a single game, which, considering how long it takes to make games these days, that's huge. And it's not just good for Microsoft, but it's actually good for the entire video game industry. If it is allowing devs to make more money from the same amount of work, I don't see any argument for how this could be detrimental to developers or the games industry. And for smaller devs, people like indies or even AA games, it allows them to get more recognition, more discoverability. It's a guarantee that they're going to make their money back, because in those cases, Xbox basically covers the entire production of the game. And people play those games that maybe they never would have otherwise, right? Things like a Planet of Lana or even a Hollow Knight. In my case, I didn't play that until it went into Game Pass, right? And so that helps that developer going forward, even because maybe you don't know like you see Planet of Lana in there and you go and you play it, and then the next time, or like the last case of Benedict Fox or any of these indie games, right? And then you are watching a showcase, an indie showcase, like 2 years from now, and the trailer starts with "From the creators of the last case of Benedict Fox," and now you know what that means because you've actually played that game. So it's just a wonderful future-looking advertisement possibility for these smaller developers to get their names out there. So it's great for preserving the longevity of big games, and it creates an entirely new marketplace for small games. Game Pass is a wonderful thing for this industry. This is also why Xbox is buying a bunch of studios. And I know that people are sort of against this industry consolidation, and I completely understand that viewpoint. But also, when you see things like Volition getting shut down because they put out a bad game that didn't make its money back, and Embracer couldn't eat those costs, having these teams be absorbed into a larger conglomerate that actually has the backing outside of the video game space, like Microsoft or Sony, it allows those developers to take more risks. They can make a game that doesn't necessarily have to be a huge hit because it doesn't need to sell 1 million copies. It just needs to get people to subscribe to the service. It just needs to be a game. It just needs to be content. It needs to be something that people enjoy. That's all. So it takes a lot of the pressure off of these devs, and it means that in the event that a game does fail, they don't have to worry about being completely pushed out of the industry because they can't afford to put their lights on anymore, right? But Xbox is buying all of these developers because they want to have a really big first-party output. They want to, so they don't have to buy individual games for Game Pass. Game Pass will have a steady flow of compelling titles from their first party alone, which will draw people to the platform where they will then buy any other third-party games that come out on Game Pass or on Xbox for full price. So Game Pass is not a replacement, it's a supplement, and it's a lure, and it prints money. So that's how Game Pass works and why it's amazing for this industry. I think it's relatively self-explanatory, so hopefully I cleared up any sort of confusion or concerns that you might have had. But if you still have any questions or disagreements, feel free to leave them in the comments below and I'll see them and respond to them as best as I can. If you like this content or just this channel in general, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, share with all your friends, do all the things that all the YouTubers want you to do. This is my first video on this brand new computer, so hopefully it doesn't sound or look any worse than usual. But if it did, I apologize for that in advance. And until next time, I'll see you around.